I'm Jeff Cornwall, and this is the Entrepreneurial Mind. Today my guest is Bailey Spaulding, and she's going to talk about one of my favorite businesses, beer. We'll be back to talk with her about Jackalope Brewing Company after these words.
Talkapolis programming is sponsored by the following. Highland Hills, a multicultural, diversified funeral home supporting the entire Davidson County community. Visit our website at www.highlandhillsfuneralhome.com or call us at 615-650-5555.
Welcome, Bailey.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So I'm just fascinated by what you do. As we talked about before we started taping, I grew up in Wisconsin, and so we had beer in our baby bottles shortly after we started stopped having formula in there.
Yeah.
So really have kind of grown up and watched all the changes in the brewing industry. When I was younger, there was lots of independent breweries, and then they consolidated, and then you guys all come along and sort of reinvent the industry. So kind of talk about that early startup. How did you guys get into this? And
Sure.
And it's you and two other partners?
Two other partners, yep. Robin, who's a friend of mine from college, she founded it with me, and then our friend Steve came on not long after we opened. So the Three Musketeers or something.
Yeah. So two women in this industry is not that common, is it?
It's not very common. But it certainly wasn't why we got into the industry, and it's been nice kind of meeting the other women. There's a group called the Pink Boot Society that's for women in beer, so you kind of get a little bit of camaraderie. You don't have to feel bad about not having a beard.
So how did you get into it, though? What you and Robin? Was it like this crazy idea at 10:30 one night at a bar, or what?
Kind of. You know, I'm from Vermont, where we have a really big craft brewing culture.
Right.
It's the most breweries per capita of any state, and so growing up down there, and I had a science background, and then moved to Nashville to go to Vanderbilt Law School.
So I have met more people interested in brewing that have science backgrounds.
Oh yeah, I wish I were a chemist, but I had a biology background.
Is it just a fascination with the whole process, or
brewing's really? I mean, it's a science experiment. You're trying to create repeatable results, but there's beer at the end, so it's better than normal science.
Right.
And so that's what really drew me to it, and I think there's it's science with an artistic side, which are my two favorite things. So I moved down here, and just hadn't ever really thought of brewing my own beer. And that was the fall of 2006. There really wasn't a lot of beer to be had, in Nashville at that point. Most of the breweries that I'd grown up with and just kind of taken for granted, nobody ever heard of before.
Right.
And so I started home brewing, and pretty quickly realized.
So you started with a bathtub beer, just
like
everybody else.
Yeah, right on the stove, fermented in the closet type thing.
So how'd the first few batches go?
The first one went great. The second one, I would brew with my friend Casey. He was a friend of mine from law school, and we got a little ahead of ourselves on the second one.
So you were in law school doing
I was at Vanderbilt Law School.
Did you ever finish that?
I did, yeah. As a licensed attorney, I just went inactive this year because I couldn't keep up with it all.
Wow. All right, cool.
A friend of mine from law school, and so we would brew. And the second batch, we made a steam-style beer, which is like Anchor Steam.
Right.
It's a lager yeast fermented at ale temperatures, and we decided to add cherries to it. We had no idea what we were doing. So,
cherries?
Oh, yeah. It was like,
like maraschino cherries?
Like real cherries, but we just kind of threw them in there. It didn't taste good, but I was in law school, so I had plenty of people who would drink not great beer for free. So I just needed the bottles back.
Right,
so.
right.
But yeah, it pretty quickly after the first brew, I was hooked, and spent 3 years of law school talking to people about how I wanted to start a brewery. And
Now, from the outside, it seems like the biggest challenge is not learning how to brew. Is how in the world you afford the equipment
yes,
to get started. This is not a cheap startup.
no, stainless steel is expensive.
It
for
is,
sure.
especially the size of stainless steel tubs that you need to get.
It's sure, yeah. So we, went through that process of, writing a business plan. We would actually use the resources at Vanderbilt Business School.
Right.
Kind of dress up like business school students and go into the library and say, I'm writing a project on starting a brewery.
And they said line up behind the other 12 that are doing the same thing. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So wrote a business plan and went about getting investors. So we did almost entirely private equity, and then a little bit of
So is it primarily friends and family?
primarily, yeah, and then people who have become friends,
Right.
as well.
Who had a passion for what you were trying to do?
Yeah, somebody. I thought of a really wise thing that somebody said to us when we were starting to go for investment was that people invest in breweries for the same reason they invest in like a baseball team. It's an emotional
Right.
investment. It's something that you want to just be a part of.
Well, I don't know if you know the history of this, but really the first independent coffee shop in town, Bongo Java, was the same thing.
Oh, really?
Bob came to town to be a journalist and was sitting around watching Bears football games with a bunch of people from Chicago,
Right.
lamenting about that there weren't any coffee shops.
Right.
And all of a sudden he had 10 investors
amazing.
pushing him to do it. So
Yeah.
it is a very
Yeah.
common kind of thing with
Right.
coffee shops and breweries and even to some degree it used to be with restaurants, although it's gotten a little bit tougher. So now the market's gotten a little bit a little more crowded since you started, because
I
it was
guess.
you and Yazoo were the first two.
Yeah, they opened 9 years before we did, and then there, at that point, Blackstone was just a brew pub, and then right when we opened, they opened that big production facility and started distributing beer. I'd imagine, I think it's like 4 or 5 breweries have opened since then, maybe more. It's hard to keep track.
I think there's 4 or 5 last week.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But
it hasn't phased you a bit.
Oh,
has it?
no, and it's honestly better. You think of a town like Portland, Oregon, or Asheville, there's a tourism driven by beer.
Right.
There's also a lot of, everywhere you go, there's draft beer. Everybody's serving local beer. So the best thing that we can all do is make fantastic beer as a Nashville brewery group.
So what do Nashville people like best in their beer? What have you learned?
Big IPA fans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a hoppy town.
It's a hoppy town.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, and there's a lot of people who are coming to us having been, Coors Light, Miller Lite drinkers. So you kind of need to have a gateway beer as well. But people, just letting people come in to it.
Right.
But hops are the thing. I think in most places in America right now, hops are the thing.
Well, that's the best beer.
So good.
Yeah, it is good.
So
It is
good.
good. So how about women drinkers? That certainly is a demographic that has come to beers. And have you found that maybe the women drinkers there's an affinity because there's women associated with Jackalope?
I do think so. When you look around our tap room on a Saturday, I think there's more women there than you would see in an average craft brewery tap room, which is great. Really exposing a new market of people to craft beer.
And are women as interested in IPAs and hoppy beers or?
It's really across the board. We don't, we have a strawberry raspberry Hefeweizen that's out right now. It's actually pink because we use real fruit in it.
Right.
It's called Lovebird. People think of it as our girly beer, but we have big, 250-pound men coming in and ordering it, and it's hard to predict what a certain person is going to want. But we like to, if someone comes in and is asking about the beers, we'll ask them about what beer style they normally like, if there's like a brand they normally drink, and we can kind of go from there. But but it's really hard to predict what people are going to want.
So what do you see? Obviously you're invested in this, and this is something that you're kind of all in. Where do you see the industry and your business maybe in 5 years?
Sure. I mean, the craft brewing industry, we're right on the verge of reaching 10% of the market. They're now, looking at getting up to 20%, which I think is possible. And that's the amazing thing. We have almost 3,000 craft breweries in the country. We still make 8% of the beer. I mean, it's wild.
Right.
For ourselves, in 5 years, right now we only distribute in Middle Tennessee, Chattanooga, and Clarksville. So we're still relatively very small, and so just continuing to grow and probably getting into some other states and solidifying ourselves a little bit.
One last question. Branding is everything, it seems like, in craft beer. Where in the world did Jackalope come from?
I believed in jackalopes growing up pretty actively, like embarrassingly so. So I have a T-shirt that a friend gave me with a jackalope on it that says "Believe in yourself." So
Perfect.
yeah, when you're graduating law school is saying I'm going to start a brewery and everyone thinks you're nuts, like.
That's your
Believe in
jackalope.
yourself.
That's your
Exactly.
jackalope.
Wear your T-shirt.
What a great story, and you guys make fabulous beers.
Thank
so,
you.
I
Thank
appreciate
you
all you
very
do.
much.
Thanks.
Thanks.